Chapter 26, Jeffrey. For a few seconds there I thought about coming clean to Captain Lunatiks and his crew, showing them that all I had in my hand was a TV remote. What stopped me was Charisse, who was giving me a look that said, "Do not fuck with me." Remember that this woman, A, was not particularly upset to see her husband go over the side, and B, had a gun, so I kept the remote in my pocket. "What do you want?" said Lunatiks. "What we want," said Charisse, "and thank you for asking, is $100 million. "That's absurd," said Lunatiks. "You're absolutely right," said Charisse. "We want $200 million. "We don't carry anything like that amount of money on the ship," said Lunatiks. "Of course not, Sven. That's why you're going to arrange to have it delivered to the ship by helicopter." "This is impossible. We are in a hurricane." Sven, said Charisse. "I'm sure a great, big, strong ship captain like you can handle a little wind." "I'm sorry, but I cannot." "What are you doing?" "I'm aiming the gun at your face, so you'll pay close attention," said Charisse. "I want you to get on the radio or the satellite or the sonar or whatever the hell you get on, and I want you to tell your company that we want $200 million in unmarked bills, and we want it in 12 hours. And if we don't get it," she gestured with her non-gun hand toward my pocket, "my associate Jeffrey here is going to press the button, and what happens then will make the Titanic look like the SS Minnow." Lunatiks looked puzzled. "What?" said Charisse. "You never heard of Gilligan's Island?" She started singing off tune. She looked at me. "How's it go?" I shrugged. She shifted the gun slightly in my direction. Something, I sang. "A 3-hour tour?" "Right," she said, "a 3-hour tour." She aimed the gun back at Lunatiks and his men. "Everybody," she said. "A 3-hour tour?" they sang hesitantly. "That sucked," said Charisse. She looked at Lunatiks. "Get to work on the money, Sven. The clock is ticking. And have somebody bring me a satellite phone. I need to make some calls." I spent the next 2 hours standing on the bridge with my hand in my pocket while Charisse yacked on the phone a few feet away. I didn't know who she was talking to, and she did not tell me. There was a TV monitor on the bridge tuned to international CNN. Horkman and I were on the screen basically all the time. They had worked our pictures into a logo that said "America Under Attack." There was also a picture of the cruise ship with a headline that said "Terror at Sea." The passengers had found out they'd been hijacked and were sending texts and emails to relatives back on land. I watched a CNN anchorwoman, frowning so hard she cracked her makeup, interview a man labeled terror expert. She asked him whether he expected the international terror gang, meaning me and Horkman, to strike again. "I hate to add to the climate of fear," said the terror expert, "but yes, I believe they will strike again, probably soon, and they could strike anywhere. These are not bumbling amateurs. This is a highly organized, well-trained organization led by a pair of very smart, cold-blooded killers who have obviously been planning this operation for a long time while posing as ordinary suburban family men. These people managed to paralyze New York City and somehow escape from one of the most intense manhunts in NYPD history. Now, despite heightened security, they've taken over a cruise ship, which means they have more than 2,000 hostages. God help those poor innocent people if that bomb is detonated." "One question about that," said the frowning anchorwoman. "Why can't the ship's crew find the bomb and just toss it overboard?" "I'm sure they would if they could," answered the terror expert. "But a cruise ship is a huge, complex vessel. And remember that this man Peckerman is a highly trained forensic plumber. He would have detailed knowledge of the ship's plumbing infrastructure, and he could have hidden the device anywhere." "Diabolical," said the anchor, frowning even deeper to show she meant it. "Thank you, Dr. Smeltwater, for those insights. Meanwhile, the entire nation remains on edge, wondering where the terror gang will strike next. Nowhere is the mood more tense than in New York City, which is still reeling from the recent wave of attacks. City wildlife authorities were finally able to recapture Hansel and Gretel, the two bears let loose from the Central Park Zoo by the terrorists during what experts believe was some kind of sexually deviant celebration ritual. In a highly dramatic scene this morning, the bears were felled by tranquilizer darts when they burst from a cluster of trees in Central Park and attempted to attack Donald Trump, who was doing a remote appearance on Good Morning America in the park to discuss the terror attacks and promote his upcoming special all-transgender edition of The Apprentice. The bears are now safely back at the zoo, along with a third animal, a rare endangered lemur, which was also inexplicably in the area. "Buddy," I said to the screen. "What?" said Charisse, who had just finished a call. "Nothing," I said. "Listen, how far are you planning to take this?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, you don't really think they're going to give us $200 million, do you?" "Absolutely." "Okay, say they do. How do we get away? Every cop in the United States will be looking for us." "They were already looking for you and you got away, right? You and your terrorist friend." "I told you we're not terrorists. I'm a fucking plumber." Charisse looked at the TV, still showing me and Horkman international terrorist kingpins. "Right," she said, "you're a plumber, and I'm Hillary Clinton." "I'm serious." "Fine, stick to that story. I don't give a shit. The point is, the money's coming." "Great, so we'll be rich until the ship gets to port, then we'll be in jail." "No, we won't. We'll be welcomed with open arms." "What the fuck are you talking about?" "I'm talking about where we're going," she said, holding up the phone. "It's all arranged. They're very excited to meet you." "Who is? Where the hell are we going?" Charisse only smiled. Chapter 27, Philip. I was standing now. My legs were incredibly wobbly, but I'd somehow staggered to my feet, and Maria and I were looking at each other but not saying a word for about a minute. Overwhelmed by the fact, by the impossible odds, by the miracle that must have occurred to have the both of us survive a night in the raging waters of the Caribbean and then deliver us onto this beach. "How is it that you're here?" she asked. I'd forgotten how beautiful she was, especially when compared to the faux Maria I had tried to save from drowning, the Maria with the hairy back, the breastless chest, and the penis-toting crotch. "I jumped off the ship to try to save you." She smiled, then we hugged. Then I collapsed to the ground because my wobbly legs gave out on me. "You okay?" she asked, laughing. "By any chance, would you happen to have a long string on you?" "String?" "To tie around me and a big stake in the ground so I won't topple over, like you do when you're growing tomato plants." Laughing again, she extended her hand and helped me back onto my feet. Still holding hands, we started walking. "Any idea where we are?" I asked. "None whatsoever," she said. "There are a lot of islands in the Caribbean that you never hear about. Some are privately owned, and some of them are uninhabited." Uninhabited appealed to me, for the time being anyway, as it would offer a much-needed respite from the uneasiness you feel when inhabited places are filled with people who think you're a hunted terrorist. Besides, how often does the fantasy of being stranded on a deserted island with a beautiful woman actually materialize in real life? A beautiful woman that if you ended up sleeping with her, it wouldn't affect your marriage, as your wife would just roll her eyes when you told her, "Hey, guess what? I had sex with a nun on a deserted island," and then change the subject to her mother's new titanium hip. Unfortunately, that break from other humans was short-lived, because as we walked a little farther, hearing no sounds other than the ones the sea was making, and the words of our own sparse conversation, we suddenly heard voices. Faint at first, but with each step we took toward a small bluff that rose beyond the water's edge, they got louder. A small group of people in what sounded like a chorus of plaintive murmurings. responsive incantations as if in prayer, with one voice in particular wailing above those of the others. I looked at Maria, who seemed to have a better sense of the urgency we were overhearing. She said nothing, but started walking faster, up the slight incline and through some brush before coming upon 5 women on their knees, rocking back and forth with their focus alternating between the heavens and a young boy lying on the ground in front of them. From the looks of him, I gathered that he was about 14 years old. I also gathered that something was terribly wrong, as he was hardly breathing. His eyes were dilated, his skin had large black blotches on it, and there was foam frothing at his mouth. I also immediately recognized that these women were speaking Spanish, which was fortunate, as I'd taken Spanish to my sophomore, junior, and senior years in high school, so communication would not be a problem. When they saw Maria and me emerge from the forest, they fell silent. Lo siento, pero la biblioteca está a la izquierda, I said to them. Maria looked at me and smiled. Philip, may I ask what you're doing? Trying to instill some confidence in these women who are obviously upset about that young boy, I whispered. By telling them you're sorry that the library is on the left? Right there was still another reason I was so attracted to Maria. She had just called me an idiot without using the word idiot. That had never happened before. Do you speak Spanish? I asked. Yes, she answered fluently. Hablamos inglés, said one of the wailing women. But I don't think I'm going to have to speak Spanish, said Maria. Why? I asked. Because that woman just said that they speak English. She said in Spanish that they speak English? Yes, said Maria. Why would she do that? I asked. Why wouldn't she say in English that they speak English? Maybe because she didn't know that we speak English. Then how did she know to even tell us that they spoke English? Maybe she just assumed we did after she heard how you spoke Spanish. Again, I was an idiot without being called one. I think I would have kissed her right then, had our attention not been drawn back to the women, who resumed their wailing over the fallen boy, who is now making the same sounds an old car makes when it has post-ignition syndrome. What happened? Maria asked the woman who was wailing louder than the others. She told Maria that her son had been bitten by a spider and that their village's doctor was on his way with medicine. She also told her that the village was about an hour away. This kid won't last an hour, I told Maria. I've seen this before. Where? She asked. I looked around. Back at the woods we just walked through to get here from the beach. I'll tell you later, I said. Right now, have these women make a fire. I don't care how they do it. Aim the sun's reflection on a mirror toward a piece of paper, or try to create friction between a flint and a rock, or rub 2 sticks together. How about these? Asked one of the wailing women, showing a book of matches she'd just taken from her pocket. Matches would also work, I said, before telling Maria to have them boil water once they got the fire going. What for? She asked. I'll tell you later, I said, before asking Maria to then put the boiling water in a cup or some vessel from which a person can drink. Let me guess, she said, you'll tell me later. No, I'll tell you now. I want to make tea, I said, and then ran back into the forest and found an old oak tree whose protruding bark made it easy for me to remove small sections of it with my hands. I grabbed a few pieces, placed them on a flat stone that was embedded in the ground, found a rock with a sharp edge, and started pounding the white oak bark until it was crushed into tiny pieces. Not a fine powder, which would have been preferable, but still small enough that when I sprinted back to the wailing women and mixed it with the hot water, I was confident it would be effective when I lifted the young boy's head and carefully had him sip the brew. The active ingredients of oak bark, especially tannin, make it an herbal cure for a lot of medical conditions, including the effects of insect bites, I told Maria. I'm just hoping it's not too late for it to handle that spider's toxins. Maria was looking at me with a combination of awe and disbelief. What other ailments does it cure? Internal bleeding, bladder infections, hemorrhoids? Big mistake, because upon hearing the word hemorrhoids, all 5 of the wailing women raised their hands and asked that I make tea for them as well. You said you've seen this before, said Maria. May I ask where? In my pet shop. I once ordered 2 tropical parrots, and a brown recluse spider had somehow gotten into the crate, and that's when I learned about Deng shock syndrome, which is what I believe this young man has. Were you able to save the parrots? Oh, yeah. The spider didn't bother the birds at all, but he bit my assistant, Hyo, who started looking like this kid until the owner of the GNC in my strip mall came in and gave him some of this stuff until the ambulance arrived. And that's what happened here. After the second cup, the young boy's high fever apparently dropped, and he slowly started to show signs of awareness by the time a Jeep pulled up with 2 men in it. The passenger was obviously the doctor, as he jumped from his seat before it came to a full stop and raced to the boy's side, while the driver was met by the mother of the ailing boy, who spoke to him and then pointed to me. After checking on the boy and getting the doctor's assurance that he was going to be all right, the kid's father approached and hugged me while crying his thanks. I introduced him to Maria, and he invited the 2 of us to his home for dinner as a way of showing his appreciation. We accepted. By the way, where are we? Asked Maria. He smiled and said, Cuba. Chapter 28, Jeffrey. I'll say this. When you hijack a cruise ship, you eat well. Of course you eat well, even if you're a regular passenger. They feed you like 8 times a day, which is why cruise people always look like hairless water buffalo wearing sneakers. But when you take over a ship with a bomb threat, you really go first class. Whatever Sharice and I asked for, it got delivered to us right away. Steak, lobster, shrimp, chocolate mousse, you name it. We washed it down with a couple of bottles of Dom, and then, this was Sharice's idea, we both steered the ship for a while. Lunatiks didn't like that, but fuck him, he didn't have the remote control. Another thing we did to pass the time while we were waiting for the money helicopter was make announcements over the ship's PA system. I'd get on there and say, "Emergency! We're about to tip over. Everybody run to the left side of the ship." And then a little while later, Sharice would get on there and say, "We are now going to have a mandatory penis inspection. We want all the men to line up on the poop deck according to length." And the thing was, those morons actually did it. But the funniest thing we did, this was also Sharice's idea, was to make the officers strip down to their underwear, then march down to the ship's theater and put on costumes. The main show was South Pacific, so we had Lunatiks and his men wear grass skirts and coconut brassieres. They looked like total douchebags. For me, that really lightened the tension of being a wanted international terrorist. While we were at the theater, we saw that the headline entertainer on the ship was Charo, so we told the crew to go get her. She didn't want to be there, and at first she refused to perform for us. But she changed her mind when Sharice fired a warning shot through her guitar. That got her up on stage pretty quick, and she sang a song, which was in Spanish. So I don't know what it was about, except she seemed to be singing it mainly to Sharice, and it had a word that sounded like puta in it a lot. When she finished, Sharice gave her a $5 tip, which I thought was hilarious, but Charo was definitely pissed. She's getting old, and when you look at her up close, her eyes are a little too close together, but I'll give her this. She still has a nice rack. The point being, Sharice and I actually had a pretty good time that night, considering the situation. I was starting to like Sharice as I got to know her as a human being instead of just a lawyer/hijacker. She definitely showed her fun side. I'll be honest, I was starting to think maybe she and I might have a future together, seeing as how Donna would probably never take me back after all this, and Sharice's husband was Shark Chow. We stayed up all night thanks to some pills we got from the ship's doctor. The next morning, just like Sharice predicted, the helicopter came. We went up to the helipad deck with Lunatiks, just the 3 of us, Sharice making sure the chopper guys could see she had a gun pointed at Lunatiks. She had the whole thing figured out. When the chopper touched down, she told the crew to stay inside and toss the money out. They heaved a couple of duffel bags out. Open them, Charisse told me. I unzipped the duffels and looked inside. They were both jammed with packets of $100 bills. Is it all there? Charisse asked. How the fuck would I know? I said. She laughed so hard she banged the gun barrel into Lunatiks' head. We were definitely developing a rapport. Good point, she said. I'll tell you this, I said. There's definitely a shitload of money. Charisse signaled the chopper to take off. All right, said Lunatiks, you got your money. Now you will give me my ship back. Sven, said Charisse, you don't give the orders. You're a schmo wearing a coconut bra. We give the orders on this ship. I liked that, the way she said we. This is unacceptable, said Lunatiks. We have done everything you asked. And you're going to keep doing everything we ask, said Charisse. Or Jeffrey and I are going to get into a lifeboat and blow up this crate, and you'll be famous forever as the captain who lost his ship while dressed like a hostess at Trader Vic's. That shut Sven up. I really had to admire Charisse. The woman had balls. She was so convincing I had to remind myself that we didn't actually have a bomb. All right, said Charisse, let's get this money downstairs, and Sven here can get this ship pointed toward Havana. What? Said Sven and I pretty much simultaneously. We're going to Havana, said Charisse. We are, I said. But we cannot go to Havana, said Lunatiks. The Cuban government is expecting us, said Charisse, giving me a look that said, no more questions. And so we went to Cuba. It took us 6 hours, with CNN, Fox, and the rest of the news networks covering every second. They were showing aerial shots of our ship, and you could see that there were big U.S. Navy vessels surrounding us, just out of sight over the horizon. Also, there reportedly were submarines in the area, including some from China and Russia. There were all kinds of terrorism experts on TV, and they were going nuts, throwing out theories about what was happening, what our plan was, what the U.S. should do, what would happen next. Everybody agreed that tensions in the Caribbean had not been this high since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Charisse and I had a couple more bottles of Dom. When we got close to Havana, it seemed like the entire Cuban Navy came out to meet us, plus a bunch of fighter jets. We went into the harbor and dropped anchor. A bunch of Cuban Navy boats came alongside, and in a few minutes the ship was swarming with soldiers carrying machine guns. Charisse and I waited on the bridge with our money and the officers. A group of soldiers came in and looked over the situation, and when they decided it was safe, they gave a signal, and a tall officer came in. I am Major Nunez of the Cuban Revolutionary Armed Forces, he said, speaking English with a very slight Spanish accent. Who is the captain of this ship? I am, said Lunatiks. He stepped forward, and as he did, the left side of his coconut brassiere slipped down, revealing his left nipple. He shoved the coconut back into place. He didn't want to look unprofessional. Lunatiks pointed at Charisse and me. These people are criminals, he said. They have placed a bomb aboard this ship. That man has a detonator. Major Nunez looked at me and said, is this true? Give it to him, said Charisse. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the remote control, and tossed it to him. He caught it, looked at it, and tossed it to Lunatiks. Lunatiks caught it and looked at it for a few seconds. Then he said something I didn't understand, which I'm guessing was Norwegian for motherfucker. Nunez smiled a little. Mr. Peckerman, I presume, he said. I nodded. And this is Mrs. Fricker? Charisse smiled and made a little curtsy. Welcome to Cuba, said Nunez. The commandant is expecting you. Chapter 29, Philip. The man's name was Ramon. His spider-bitten son was Ramon Jr. His wailing wife was Ramona. I wonder if they ever get confused, I yelled to Maria. We were sitting next to each other in the back seat of the Jeep that was taking us to their home. But even by yelling, we could barely hear each other over the grunting of its engines and the noises the tires made as it sped along the top of a primitive road. Why would they get confused? She yelled back. To them, they are Mom, Dad, and Junior. I don't see a problem. I had never been in the back seat of a Jeep before, or in the front seat, so I guess you could say this was my first time in a Jeep. What about mail? I asked. What happens when a letter comes to the house and it's addressed to Ramon, but the sender meant for it to go to Ramon Jr.? My arm was around her, and when I pulled her closer so she could hear me, her head stayed on my shoulder. In that case, when Ramon realizes the mistake, he hands the letter to his son and simply says, "This is for you." She was smiling. "You okay now, Philip?" "I think so." The Jeep pulled off the dirt road and onto a potholed paved one that was just as bumpy. We looked out, and on either side, what we saw could only be described as squalor. Run-down stores, abandoned gas stations with bone-dry pumps, white curtains in the windows of decrepit buildings attempting to make things look homey. And when we turned off that road into Ramon Jr., and Ramona's neighborhood, we entered what was basically a suburban version of the shabbiness we'd just seen. "I hope you like quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso," said Ramona, as we walked on a gravel path from the driveway to the front door. "That's what I make for dinner every Monday." I was hungry, famished in fact. So hungry I could eat a quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso, no matter what that was. The inside of the house was somewhat more cheerful than the outside, thanks to the good intentions of the colorful rugs and threadbare furniture sitting on them, and to the framed pictures of a smiling Ramon, Ramona, and Ramon Jr. in formation on top of end tables, and to Nacho, a frisky mutt that needed approximately 5 more pounds on him to be considered scrawny, and to the Roomba melodies coming through the single speaker on a triangular shelf nailed into the corner where 2 walls met. Yes, it was home sweet home to a happy family protected by the statuettes of a watchful Jesus deployed about the room, and by the arsenal of machine guns that were stacked from floor to ceiling in their kitchen and bathroom. "I just flushed the toilet and almost shot my ass off," I whispered to Maria. "What's this all about?" she whispered in response. "Don't let this number of weapons throw you," said Ramon, who'd obviously taken notice of our reactions. "There's plenty more in the shed out back. Grenades, too." "Oh, good," I heard myself saying. I was worrying there wasn't enough firepower. "What the hell are you talking about?" Maria whispered to me. "I just humor him," I whispered back. "He may be dangerous. By the way, I can't remember the last time I whispered this much." "We are a happy family, but it is time for us to become happier," said Ramon, as the smell of what I could only assume was quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso came wafting from the huge tray Ramona was carrying into the dining room. "Now is the time for my family and all the other families who have been under the heels of this man to live the lives that our fathers died for," Ramona continued. "What man are you talking about?" asked Maria. "The premier," he answered. "In 1959, his own father led the revolution and then became a worse dictator than the one he overthrew. The average Cuban today lives on $20 a month and relies on government ration cards," said Ramona, who was now setting the table. "This will soon change, and we'll discuss this all at dinner," said Ramon. He then added, "Those quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso sure look good," while trying to grab one off of the huge tray. "You'll spoil your appetite," said Ramona, slapping her husband's hand away. "He really loves my quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso," she told us. "If it were up to him, he'd have quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso every meal. Sometimes I think he married me because of my quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso." They both laughed as if this was a joke they always shared. Maria and I felt it right to laugh as well, like idiots. It was about then that I noticed how many place settings Ramona was putting on the table. I wonder if other people are joining us for dinner, I said to Maria. Well, there's you and me. The two of them makes 4, and if Ramon Jr. has recovered enough to join us, it makes 5. Okay, but the table's set for 8, I said. Let us celebrate, said Ramon, who then took a bottle of wine out of a cabinet and took the cork out with a knife he pulled from a sheath attached to his belt. To our son's good health, said Ramona with a nod in our direction. And to the coming revolution, Ramon said, while pouring. Maria and I looked at each other, but said nothing as he handed his wife and the two of us our filled glasses, and as the 4 of us lifted them, he completed his toast. And to the Lord for delivering you to us at this exact time, Senor Horkman. Before I had a chance to react, the front door opened and the other dinner guests arrived. A tall man we would come to know as Nunez, followed by, of all people, Peckerman and Charisse Fricker, who were as shocked to see us as we were to see them. Our liberators are here, proclaimed Ramon, pointing to me and Peckerman. Nunez raised his fist in agreement. They will lead us to our victory, Commandant. Chapter 30, Jeffrey. This was definitely not what Charisse and I had in mind, winding up in some rural Cuban shack in some rural Cuban area with a bunch of rural Cubans. What we had in mind was a whole different scenario, which was this. We would land in Cuba with the 200 mil. We would make a deal with the Cuban government, give them a nice commission for their trouble, let's say 20%, which is $40 million. Then Charisse and I would proceed to live like kings, because $160 million goes a long way in a shithole like Cuba, where the average person makes like 87 cents a month. We could pay them way better, say $5 a month, and they'd be like, wow, let's give them excellent service, nacho gusto. Parentheses, I took some Spanish in high school, close parentheses. This was actually Charisse's scenario. When she explained it to me on the ship going to Havana, I had a couple of questions. The main one being, was she nuts? Why would the Cuban government go along? I mean, they have an army, right? Why not just point machine guns at us and say, thanks, but we'll take the whole 200 mil. You two can go to prison and survive by eating each other's toenails. That's what I would do if I had machine guns and a couple of bozos showed up with a ship they hijacked with a remote control. But Charisse said that's not going to happen. Why not? Because you're a dangerous international terrorist. But I'm not. I keep telling you that. And I'm starting to believe you. But the United States government says you are, and the Cubans believe you are, so they're going to show you some respect. I still had my doubts, but when we got to Havana, everything seemed to go exactly the way Charisse said it would. Nunez and his men didn't take the money. They let us keep the duffels as they escorted us off the ship to a convoy of military trucks lined up on the dock. We got into the middle one, us in back, Nunez and a driver in front. Then we took off like a motorcade, which I assume was going to the presidential palace. So far, so good. In parentheses, or as the Spanish say, mi casa, su casa, close parentheses. We drove through the city for a while, but we didn't see anything that looked like a palace. After about 45 minutes, it began to dawn on us that we weren't going to the middle of the city. We were heading into the suburbs. The roads were getting shittier and shittier, worse even than the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. Pretty soon we were bouncing along what looked like a yak path. Charisse tapped Nunez on the shoulder. He turned around and said, yes. Where the hell are we going? She said. I assumed you knew, he said. You assumed wrong. Where are we going? He nodded toward me to see his comrade. He said, what? I said, what comrade? Nunez smiled. He had those really, really white teeth that some people just naturally have. It pisses me off, because I use whitening strips that cost so much that the drugstore keeps them locked in cabinets, like precious jewels or nicotine gum. I've used enough of those strips to wallpaper my living room, and my teeth are still more or less the color of the margins of the Declaration of Independence. What gets me is I can remember when nobody gave a shit about this. You'd see people on TV, big stars, Johnny Carson, for example, or Barbara Eden. And I'm not saying they had ugly teeth, but their teeth were not exceptional. You didn't notice their teeth, is my point. Their teeth were human. But now in the entertainment industry, everybody's teeth are the color of a brand new urinal. There's like a miniature men's room in their mouths. When they smile, they're giving skin cancer to people around them from the reflection. But that's what we're all supposed to look like now. That's why we're paying $40 a box for those stupid strips that probably cost 18 cents to make and sting the hell out of your mouth. And you still have yellow teeth. And then you see some guy like Nunez. He lives on this shithole island where they don't even have drugstores. Probably brushes his teeth with the sea urchin. And he has teeth like Tom fucking Cruise. Which is why I was pissed off when he smiled at me the way he did when I said, "What, comrade?" "Please," said Nunez, "you do not have to play this game with me." "What game?" I said. "I don't know what the hell you're talking about." Nunez nodded. "I understand," he said. "You will trust nobody but Ramon himself." "Who's Ramon?" said Charisse. Nunez flashed his urinals at her. "So the lady is playing the game also. Fine. We will talk when we arrive." "Arrive where?" I said. But Nunez had turned away. He was done talking. We kept driving and the road kept getting shittier. After a couple of hours, we came to a village, turned down a side road, and stopped in front of a shack. "We are here," said Nunez. "This is where we're going," said Charisse. "An outhouse?" Nunez only smiled. We got out of the truck, Charisse and I grabbing the duffel bags. We followed Nunez into the shack. There were some people sitting at a table, including a Cuban guy who I figured was Ramon. He and Nunez said something to each other, but I wasn't paying attention. I was staring, with my mouth open, like a grouper, at another person at the table, the last person I expected to see, here or anywhere else. Horkman. He was with the woman who fell off the ship before he jumped. "What the fuck?" I said. "It's nice to see you too," he said. "How the hell did you get here?" I said. "I swam," he said. He put his arm around Maria. "We swam?" I couldn't believe it. The asshole fucked up his own death? She stepped forward, looking very tense. "What about Mike?" she said. "Mike?" said Horkman. "My husband." Without saying a word, Horkman stood up, came over to Charisse and grabbed her in a big hug. Then he held her at arm's length, gave her a big, sad, moony face look, and said, "I'm afraid he didn't make it." Charisse relaxed. "Jesus," she said, "you had me worried there." Ignoring Horkman's surprised look, she shoved him away, turned to Nunez and said, "Now that we're here, can you please tell us why we're here?" Nunez looked at Ramon, who smiled. He also had really nice teeth, the prick. "I assume you know already," he said, "and you are simply testing me to see how much we know. Fine, I will go along with this. I am the commandant of the People's Army of the People, which has been preparing to strike down the regime of the corrupt pig who has sucked the blood out of this nation." Wait, said Charisse, turning to Nunez. "Don't you work for the corrupt blood-sucking pig?" "He believes I do," said Nunez. "The old fool trusts me. In fact, he personally ordered me to meet your ship, but by then Ramon had told me the real reason you were coming here." "Which is what?" I said. "Please," said Ramon, "we are not fools. First, your comrade swims ashore undetected by the authorities, and within hours is able to make contact with me, even though my location is a closely guarded secret." "Horkman did that?" I said, looking at Horkman, who was looking puzzled. "He is a highly skilled commando," said Ramon. "He owns a pet store," I said, "called The Wine Shop." "Yes, of course, he has a cover story, but he is an extraordinary soldier." "He's a putz," I said. "That is a military rank, I assume," said Ramon. "I am unfamiliar with it. But to continue. Only hours after Senor Horkman swims ashore, you, his comrade, the famous Jeffrey Peckerman, arrived by the brilliant maneuver of hijacking a cruise ship, bringing with you enough American dollars to finance our cause." "What?" said Therese and me, pretty much at the same time. For years, said Ramon, we have been secretly sending out requests for help, hoping that somewhere in the world we would find allies willing to fight with us. We had almost given up hope. But now you are here, Horkman and Peckerman, famous revolutionary fighters as seen on CNN. With your leadership, and with this great financial gift you have brought us, we can finally begin our fight. Ramon was pounding the table now, shouting, We have waited long enough. We will not wait a moment longer. The revolution begins now. But first we will enjoy Ramona's delicious quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso. He shouted something in Spanish, and some soldiers came in and took away our duffel bags. Next thing we knew, we were sitting at the table, me across from Horkman, being served heaping plates of some Cuban glop that looked like they scraped it off the bottom of an aquarium, while Ramon and Nunez toasted us. Outside, people were singing and firing guns into the air, getting ready for the revolution, which was going to start right after dinner, and which this asshole and I were supposed to lead. Chapter 31, Philip. I think we should wait till morning. We were sitting in the dining room eating what I could only assume was dessert for no reason other than it was an orange salad served alongside a cup of brown liquid that I could only assume was coffee. I hardly touched my dinner as I wasn't a fan of Latin cuisine. I'd eaten it for the first time about 3 years earlier when a restaurant called La Casa del Sol opened in the same strip mall as the wine shop. So, as a gesture of strip mall solidarity, I gave the place a few tries, until it became evident that if I were going to continue eating there, I'd have to surgically line my large intestine with copper tubing to withstand the corrosive torrents careening through it after every meal. What should wait till morning? Asked Ramon, looking up at the mouthful of the orange salad. The revolution, I told him. But why? Asked Nunez, also with a mouthful of the orange salad in his mouth. Seated next to each other, with their mouths alternately opening and closing, they look like warning lights at an intersection. Because it's been our experience that governments are more apt to fall in the daytime, I said, with every hope that the omnivore to my left, aka Peckerman, would take maybe 10 seconds away from making sure there wasn't a morsel left on anyone's plate to hold up his end of the word hour and chime in. No such luck. So I ventured onward. It adds to the element of surprise, I explained. But isn't it more surprising to attack at night when everyone's sleeping? Asked Ramona. That's done so often these days that there's really no surprise. It's almost expected at this point, I told her. But in the late morning, say 11, maybe 11:30, when the regime you wish to overthrow is inside the very buildings you're looking to take over, it's so much more effective. At night, you're just attacking empty offices, said Maria. Exactly, I said. It felt good to hear a voice that wasn't my own, especially Maria's. And from the nods now coming from the other side of the table, it looked like my stalling tactic, as feeble as it was, had a logic that Ramon and Nunez were willing to consider. We will follow your lead, Nunez said. We will go outside and tell the rebels to get a good night's sleep, said Ramon as they left the table and walked toward the front door. Dealing with Peckerman was another story. While Maria and that silicone-infused bimbette he was traipsing around with helped Ramona clear the table, I was off in a corner trying to knock some sense into him. I'm just trying to buy us some time so we can figure out how we can get out of this mess, Peckerman. Don't you get it? They think we know what we're doing, that we actually want to do what they think we're doing. I know that, but it's you who doesn't get it, Horkman. I want them to think that you've got the brains and that I'm the dumb one, like those guys Lenny and Squiggy in Of Mice and Men. You mean Lenny and George? Lenny and George? In the millisecond between the time I heard him say that and when my lips got in position to respond, I was somehow able to mentally scroll down the list of the biggest imbeciles I've ever met and saw Peckerman's name sprout wings and fly to the top. Peckerman? Lenny and Squiggy were the goofy sitcom characters who lived upstairs from Laverne and Shirley. Lenny and George were the migrant farm workers in the novel Of Mice and Men by the Pulitzer Prize-winning author John Steinbeck. I pray you can appreciate the difference. Maria and Charisse came back to the dining room table and grabbed some more plates. Apparently, Peckerman caught my gaze that followed Maria back to the kitchen. Fuck her yet? Excuse me? The nun. A word to the wise, Horkman. Nuns consider themselves married to God, so I'd watch my step if I were you, he said, pointing skyward. That is one jealous husband you don't want to piss off. He's God, for God's sake. Fucking guy can turn your dick into a fried wonton just like that, he said while snapping his stubby little fingers. Do you have to talk that way, Peckerman? What way? Your choice of words, effing this, effing that, especially when you're talking about nuns and God. I never said effing, Horkman, I said fucking. I know what you said. So if you're going to quote me, I'd like for you to quote me accurately. Fine. Fine? Yeah, fine. Then say it, Horkman, say fucking. No. No? You just said fine. Cut it out, Peckerman. Come on, Horkman. You're an adult male who has a mortgage and a pet shop, so there's no reason whatsoever for you to say effing like you're some choir boy who's going to get cornholed by a priest who thinks that if you say fuck, it's a request. Now say it, damn you. Say fuck. And then, without warning, he lunged and wrestled me to the floor like I was a rodeo steer and proceeded to pummel me while yelling, say it, you weasel, until Ramon, now with a rifle slung over his shoulder, came back into the house also yelling, say it. Huh? Peckerman and I said in unison as Ramon pulled him off me and helped us both to our feet. You heard me, shouted Ramon. Go out there and say to them what you said to us, that we should wait till morning before we go to the capital city, because they're ready now. But maybe they'll listen to you because of who you are. He then motioned us out the front door, where we suddenly found ourselves staring into the face of a mob of maybe 100 excited rebels, who were raising rifles and torches, and upon seeing us, much to my horror, began cheering, Vive el Horkman and Vive el Peckerman. Well, I guess they think you're a more important terrorist because they said your name first, whispered Peckerman with a tone that simply reeked of jealousy. Either that, or they're chanting in alphabetical order. Yeah, that must be it, I said with just enough sarcasm to make him even more jealous. For the most part, they speak Spanish, Nunez told us, so let them hear your voices, and I will tell them what you've said. Okay, I heard myself saying, and then felt the two of them staring at me and Peckerman as we each fell silent with the hopes that the other would speak first. You first, Peckerman finally said. Why me? I asked. Because they're not chanting in alphabetical order, he said, like the whiny turd that he was. I then looked out at the mob, extended my arms, and patted the air downward as a signal for them to be quiet. They did. Big shot, I heard Peckerman say under his breath. All people should be free, I shouted, before Nunez shouted its Spanish translation to the crowd, who became vocal again upon hearing it. They should be free because they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I proclaimed with every hope that very few of the people in this raucous mob had recently taken a look at our Declaration of Independence. Apparently they hadn't, as Nunez's translation stirred them even more so. And toward that end, every government should be dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. I went on to say with every hope that the mob hadn't recently taken a look at Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. This time Nunez's translation caused them to cheer louder. So give me liberty or give me death, I shouted, with every hope that Cuba's public school system didn't deem it important to spend an inordinate amount of time teaching their barefoot students about Patrick Henry. And this time Nunez's translation managed to bring the crowd's passions to a glorious crescendo, as the very thought of their impending freedom simultaneously ignited a celebration of singing and dancing, combined with the mounting cries of Quando, Quando, which even I knew meant when, and was the actual reason that Ramon had brought us outside to begin with. Quando! Quando! The crowd's single voice kept growing louder. Well, Ramon asked. Quando! Quando! What shall I tell them? Nunez wanted to know. Quando! Quando! So I guess now would be a good time to tell you that what happened next still stuns me to this very day. For at the exact moment I was about to answer the mob's rallying cry of Quando by shouting Mañana, that idiot Peckerman, who had remained mercifully quiet thus far, pointed to a group of rebels who were celebrating by holding hands while dancing in a circle, and shouted at the top of his hideous lungs, Ahora! Which is an Israeli folk dance, though it was only natural that a Spanish-speaking mob who just asked when they would start the revolution heard it as Ahora, which means now, and then let out loud cries of Vive el Horkman and Vive el Peckerman as they turned on their heels and headed toward the capital.